Welcome to another episode of Unstructured Unlocked. I'm your co-host, Tom Wild.
And I'm your co-host, Michelle Govea.
Michelle, we've got a really interesting topic to
Mhm.
discuss today with a great guest who's kind of got a front row seat to a bunch of the aspects of what we're going to discuss around modernization, specifically mainframe and all of the legacy systems that have dominated insurance for a long time. We've got Terry Buechner from AWS. Terry is a principal insurance specialist and core system modernization lead. So that certainly describes Terry, I think the things that you focus on a regular basis across life, commercial, specialty, and more. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, maybe we'll kick it off. It is a rich topic. Would you say that this modernization effort is accelerating? Is it a newer emphasis? Has it been going on kind of at a steady clip? What's been your observation of sort of the pace of this, if it's changed or if it's been more of, a steady effort of the last, call it, decade?
It's an interesting question. I think that an old boss of mine used to say, if you've seen one insurer, you've only seen one, right? There's not, even though there's a lot of commonalities across the industry, and when it comes to core systems, of course, as well, but they're all in kind of unique positions. Is it accelerating? It feels like it sometimes, and other times it feels like there's some headwinds against that too. And I know we're going to unpack that a bit today, but I think that generally speaking, the pace of change has increased, in my opinion, because of the headwinds that the insurance industry is facing overall in terms of demographic changes, kind of slow growth in the mature markets, and the need around that. And a lot of that legacy is sitting in those mature markets, the need to adapt to those changes, to bring on new products and services, to shift from kind of being very reactive to being a more of a proactive partner across both life and property and casualty with customers too. And with legacy systems, whether they're mainframe or one of the many other legacy systems that are out there or legacy types, it's difficult to be that agile and reactive to and proactive. With mainframes and other legacy systems, it's you're kind of stuck in the way we've always done business. It's stable typically, but other things are changing that too, with other headwinds in there and accelerating that pace of change in terms of a lot of people who know how to maintain those older systems are retiring or already have retired. So the skills aren't there, and recruiting people to take care of those legacy systems is difficult, right? So retaining and attracting IT talent is tough when you have those older systems. And then you bring in brand new things like generative AI and agentic AI and all these others. It's difficult to take advantage of those new capabilities when you have those legacy systems in place too. So it's a long way of sort of not actually answering your question, Chubb, but I think that in general, I would say it is accelerating for all those reasons.
Terry, maybe we can, as Tom, well, let me just start with, as Tom said, I learn something new every time we do an episode of this podcast, but I was especially interested in talking to you because this is an area that it's not part of my day-to-day focus or how we talk to even our insurance partners. So, but it is an area that all the carriers need to think about and they need to understand. And so I'm really excited to dive into your perspective and understand. So maybe a little bit of a level set question when we think about, because terms like legacy systems, core system, they all come with like weighty connotations, or as you said, each carrier is going to think of that differently, right? A legacy system for somebody could be 15 years if they're really transformative, or it could be it's been in existence, probably since before I was born. And that's fine too. So maybe just a little bit of a level set. And when you're talking about mainframe modernization as it refers to core systems, like is it the full spectrum, like billing, policy center, claims? Is it one particular area that typically is at the forefront of that modernization first? Like, how do you, when you think of that whole area as being a core systems lead, which is probably a very big job, how do you think about it when you're positioning it with carriers?
It's a very good point, yeah, and thinking through, what our definitions around what that core looks like. Right? So I think generally speaking, you're right, absolutely, Michelle, in the sense of it being the policy system, claim system, the billing systems. Really, at the biggest, I think, for many carriers, big questions around, and many of them, by the way, in those legacy systems are monoliths. They're all kind of built at the same time, all very tightly coupled together. So that functionality can be difficult to, particularly on the mainframe side, be able to strip that out as a separate piece. But even when we talk about legacy, I think also to your point, if you think about some of the installs back when packaged commercial off-the-shelf systems started to become more popular more than a decade ago, around policy, billing, and claims as individual systems within that, those systems on the carriers in the carrier's data center, on premises, as we like to say, right, not a cloud-based system, are also now legacy systems too. And so are they as old as some of the 40, 50-year-old systems that are running on mainframes for life insurers? No, but they're still, in some cases, 10, 15 years old at this point, even if they've been updated and with the latest versions of those systems, still a legacy kind of approach to how they're deployed and how they're maintained over time. They're not a cloud native system that carriers are starting to move to today. Now it's still a long road for them to get there as well. But I think when I think about those core systems, in particular the ones that are locked away on a mainframe, but even other legacy systems too, is that policy system, the system of record around the policy information, and all the information about that, is that core policy information, the policy administration system. And those surround systems, the billing and claim systems, are a little bit easier in some ways to strip that out, at least from a functionality perspective. But it all comes down to, as you guys know quite well, around the data. What can we do with the data? Do we have is that data in sync? If you do strip out those systems, if you have the claim system separate or the billing system and other surround systems, of which there are many, many systems around that are either on premises or homegrown systems, or maybe they're various versions of commercial off-the-shelf systems all integrated together. But where is that data sit? Where is that system? Where is that record, that core piece of information about the policyholder, including all their claims and everything else associated with them? But making sure that we have that one version of the truth that is being replicated in real time as need be. But that's really the heart of it, that carriers tend to be very conservative about moving over as well, because they don't want to lose that data. They don't think should be out of sync in terms of data, both from a customer service perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. They can get into serious trouble if those things are not synced up properly.
How do you think about the ROI and the business case that insurers use to think about this? And maybe as the part two of that question, what have you seen as, the success patterns? Is it a, big cutover of everything? Is it a migration? Obviously not a loaded question. What have you seen as success patterns here that support the business case?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, Tom, because I think that carriers have found it difficult to build an ROI around modernization, particularly a big rip and replace kind of approach to it. So carriers, and we talked a little bit about the culture already, that the kind of the conservative nature of decision making around that sort of incremental change is more common. But I do think that that is starting to, as we talked about the first question, accelerate now because of the macroeconomic issues and other demographic changes, and other things that are creating that more of a burning platform to be more agile, be more proactive, and be able to bring things to market more quickly and experiment around these things and leverage generative AI and other capabilities too. So what a problem around building that ROI is that it isn't just the technical effort around the modernization. So if they just look at it from a cost perspective, unless the underlying system or systems are unstable, it might be difficult to build that on a pure one-to-one business case to bringing in a new system, or whatever that system might be, right? So thinking about it in a more holistic approach to that. Also, if you try to build a business case around it, so many factors in terms of growth or claims are way outside of the ability for that core system to control. Demographic changes, macroeconomic changes, how they market a new product, what kind of global catastrophe situation in terms of the hurricane season, that is, all those kinds of things are way outside the control of the new policy system or new claims or billing system. So can you really say that it helped me lower my all the key metrics that we look at in insurance, like combined ratio, right, or loss ratio, or any other of the insurance specific business metrics? It's tough to tie them back to that because, again, outside of control of that system. So they need to start, and where I've seen success is carriers looking at it in a more holistic view, thinking about it in terms of net promoter score with the customers, around claims, time to a claim being from first notice of loss through, through the claim being processed end to end, the number of claims that are now straight through process, looking at other, they're not exactly non-standard metrics, they're fairly standard metrics, but looking at beyond just the very cost-based analysis of the investment around that. So, I mean, that's one piece of it, is building that business case needs to be a bit more holistic than carriers are used to, I think.
Mm.
Um, in terms of, to your question, in terms of like where I've seen success. So one is certainly breaking down the modernization into smaller measurable wins, right? You don't need to try to do everything at once. We have seen that. And I think probably the heyday of that, looking back at some of my prior jobs at IBM and Majesco, we saw a lot of big y- movements of trying to bring in a new commercial off-the-shelf policy and claim system, and with a lot of cost overruns and budget and time overruns, and it's just too much happening at once. So the business use business case is difficult to achieve in that. So breaking it down into smaller, more measurable chunks is one piece of that. I think risk mitigation, thinking that into the return on investment business case, needs to think about overall risk mitigation, about the lack of ability for data loss or failure of those older systems too, or even projecting out the lack of skills to maintain those systems in terms of those risk calculations. Figuring out how to, we have work on something we call the cloud value framework around increased business agility. So how much more quickly can you roll out new products or new services or new functions within that too? Be able to measure that as well. And again, that talent aspect, I think being able to recruit and retain people over time and thinking about those. So building all those pieces into a business case is extremely important to actually move these things forward.
Interesting. Terry, I want to go back to some. I'm gonna do a pretty lengthy lead up to what will eventually end up as a question for you.
All right.
But I wanted to go back to something you said about when you've seen one insurance carrier, you've seen one insurance carrier. And the closest experience that I have to anything like this is I represented the business as in a core system transformation at one of the carriers that I worked at. So I was more focused on what are the requirements for these particular product types that need to, move into this new core system when it launches, right? So the policy documents, what do they look like? What are the state, rates and filings that need to go into it? And I was less concerned about where does the data sit today and how does it move into that. My getting to the question that I wanted to ask is, my experience was, for the most part, I didn't actually care about what systems or where the data was prior. So I don't even know if we were working in one system or multiple core systems prior to the move. But I do know, and I've heard from some carriers, if you can believe it, they have up, because if they've grown through acquisition, like I know one carrier that has 30 plus core systems that they use, right? And that could be defined as, 15 different claim systems, 15, whatever, but 30 plus is how they described it. And so when you think about, back to Tom's question about the ROI or the challenges there, how how do you position, or how do carriers think about that incremental benefit if they're moving from one system over versus wanting to make the case of, for a single source of truth, for efficiency across the organization? How do we consolidate 30 into, let's not even call it one, let's just say 5, and how does that change the discussion and the considerations from the mainframe side and the data validation side?
Yeah, I think that changes the calculation quite a bit. I think the same old boss who made that comment about seeing one carrier versus only seeing one, said at a recent conference that the average, I didn't actually fact check this number, but he said average number of core systems for carriers worldwide was 23. So I mean that's the average. Even if that is an exaggeration, I mean that's, and to your point, around 30. I mean it's not, so it's certainly not a common problem that many carriers have.
Yeah.
And even without the thought of modernizing those systems, getting data that's locked away in those siloed systems is tough too, right? So one of the big incremental gains that we can be done and is on the glide path, if you will, to modernization or sunsetting some of those older systems, is getting that data into a data store that can be accessed, right? So being able to get that data into a place that you can start to analyze the data, at the very least synchronize that data so that you're not if you have three different policies with the carrier that that you used to work at, for example, are you getting three different bills? Or if you call into one call center, are they going to be able to access that information and update your address, or all those kinds of things that make the customer experience a horrible one? And this is a very common problem within the insurance space. So trying to understand where the data is today, be able to put it into a data store that is accessible by multiple lines of business, by different groups as well, by the call center or the contact center, and the agents themselves. Everybody has access to that data, and synchronizing that data. I think both, particularly in the mainframe space, but across all forms of legacy systems, that is a key aspect and a key driver of that return on investment too. But you have to tie it back to those kinds of things around NPS or other customer satisfaction scores, other things like that. But I think that is a key piece of it, being able to pull that data out, get that data into the hands that people need to be able to run analytics against it, both predictive as well as generative and other, the traditional artificial intelligence as opposed to the new forms that are growing out today.
Mhm.
But if you have that data locked away, it's really difficult to do that and be able to do anything with it.
It's interesting to even think that, Guidewire, as an example, in a sense, has become a legacy system on-prem, right? And,
Right.
in talking about Guidewire, particularly because they're a key strategic partner to both of us, they've obviously had a huge investment in their cloud strategy, their cloud migration strategy. I remember being in Vegas at Guidewire Connections, I think it was 3 years ago now, where it was just beginning. And now, I think they've had tremendous success with it. Both their financial performance has indicated that. And when I talk to customers out there, I think it's really worked. It's been a success story. How do you can you break down a bit for us sort of the Guidewire approach to going cloud and their customers' adoption of that? Because I know that you guys are a critical partner, for them in that strategy. I think it almost bears its own little mini discussion here.
That that is true. And as a partner of, and we're both, as you point out, Tom, partner of Guidewires, and they're a great partner. They've been a market leader for a long time, and really kind of led the charge in terms of the development of a separate core system, and really the capabilities around that, and are driving adoption on the cloud side too. To your point, and we at AWS, not surprisingly, have been kind of pushing the mantra of software as a service for almost all systems. Easier sell for industries like particularly complex, heavily regulated industries like insurance, around the kind of the horizontal plays, the Databricks of the world, or Snowflakes, or anything that is not an industry, although it's focused on the industry, is not specific to that industry, unlike core systems like we're talking about today. So those, it's taking a little bit longer to get to that point. But what I loved about Guidewire's approach, to your point, around 3 years ago, they were talking about it over a long period of time. It was discussed internally. I'm sure they have many debates about the pros and cons, but once they made that decision, they have gone full force around that, which is pretty impressive. And compare that 3 years ago to last year's connections, when they were very much talking about it and highlighting all the customers that have been moved over to Guidewire Cloud, and their approach to. I'm looking forward to connections this year. I'm sure it's going to be even more interesting and exciting announcements around that as well. So I think that a big part of that is, not specific to Guidewire from a technical perspective, but the adoption mentality around that from a top-down perspective, very clear messaging around it. And it's what we tell our carrier customers too. It's that you need to have, when you're moving to the cloud, whether it's you're taking your data center, or you're reducing or eliminating your data center footprint and getting it over to the cloud, you need to have that clear mandate from senior leadership around it, messaging that, sending the message from, hey, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and I love what the way the Guidewire said it, as well as what we tell our customers, is it's about their customers. It's about supporting their customers and providing the best level of service to their customers in terms of updates, in terms of patches, all the things that they need to do. And sure, there's going to be some pain perhaps for some along the way, but really pushing that and being and kind of getting everybody 100% behind that approach. So that, I think that's one big piece of it. I think that from a technical perspective, with their CDA, their approach to getting data and replicated in near real time, if not real time, or as close to real time as possible, so that customers feel comfortable that their data is in sync, and wherever that data sits, so that being able to provide that CDA access to to push that data either in a curated form via kind of app events or via an uncurated form into whatever that data store they need to have via CDA. So I think they have a variety of approaches there. And again, it's going to be up to the individual carrier to kind of adopt which pattern makes the most sense for them. But they're making it easier, much easier to accelerate that cloud adoption by the approach they take.
And I think one thing, just a follow-up point to that, I think one thing that they did, which was smart, is, back to your point about how do you build the ROI in the business case, rather than making it specifically about, you know, feeds and speeds and bits and bytes, they really invested in the partner ecosystem around that
Yeah.
same time to say, look, there's another world you get to unlock as a cloud customer, which is this marketplace of add-on solutions like Indico that you can now take advantage of in a much more seamless and cost-efficient way. So I think that dual strategy, really helped drive adoption as well. And certainly as a partner, we appreciate it because it's a good catalyst for our joint customers with Guidewire as well.
Absolutely. I think that it's kind of interesting around that ecosystem play. It makes a lot of sense to your point. I think that carriers historically, Michelle, probably you could or had seen some of this as well, purchase software in kind of a very siloed approach, and still in many cases do, unfortunately. So it's thinking about we need a new data replication system, we need a new document management system, we need a new policy system for this line of business, without thinking about kind of a holistic business focused approach to it. And that ecosystem play that you highlight makes it much easier for the carriers to think about it from a holistic perspective. So like, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to become more agile. We're trying to roll out products more quickly. We're going to move into new regions, whatever that their business strategy is around that. And then they can see how a technical approach with Guidewire, for example, is at its heart. But all those partners in the ecosystem make that easier for them to see how all those pieces integrate together. And yeah, I think that the ecosystem approach is the way to go, and being a flexible microservices, API based kind of ecosystem economy, so that we already have a document management system, so we don't need to use one that's available in the marketplace but it's easy to integrate those things. And so making it, they're loosely coupled, they're in the ecosystem to make it easier to adopt them, but it's loosely coupled so you can mix and match or try different depending on what you need or what you already have in their portfolio.
I think a question that I've got after hearing both of you speak about, we have a lot of companies that we work with too that are, a lot of the strategy discussions are how do you become part of these ecosystems, right? Because they're channel partners, it makes it easier to integrate, easier to get access to your solution. But Terry, back to something you said at the start of that discussion was positioning, right? And how do you make it clear what you're doing, why you're doing it. So curious, I guess both of you even think about what are some of the misconceptions that carriers have about what it takes to modernize and become more flexible?
So some of the things that come to mind is in terms of misconceptions around data access, I think is one big one, because I think that one is some have thrown up their hands and assumed that data, particularly mainframe-based data, but not just mainframe-based data, is inaccessible for whatever reason. So we're going to wall that data off. That line of business, we'll run that separately, or maybe run as a one-off piece of business. We can't access it, so why bother trying? So it's not inherently accessible. It is accessible, but the flip side of that, they often then underestimate the amount of work that is done around data mapping and cleansing of this older data. There is work that needs to be done, which you guys obviously know quite well, working in that space. So, and either assuming that it's not accessible or underestimating the amount of work that is done within that. I think that's one of the major pitfalls that I see around that. Tom, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there is sort of this question of, is it all or nothing? Like if you're on legacy systems, is it hopeless? You can't take advantage of AI, or are there ways to do that? So I mean, I think that it's more complex, I think, but I think increasingly customers are wary of solutions that are going to be a huge IT lift because, the time and the risk associated with that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think you can take an incremental approach, and many are doing that. It seems like a wise move. I think some carriers use that as an excuse to not do anything. And, there's a lot of headwinds in the industry, as we've talked about a little bit. So I think that most carriers should be at least thinking about modernizing some of those systems, if not actively doing so. But data accessibility and availability it's kind of a no-brainer starting point. Not that it's not without uh, not that it's not without risks and costs associated with that, of course, but data is at the heart of everything we do in insurance, right? And there is quite a bit of data arbitrage. If you as a carrier know more about your customers and prospects than your competitors do, you can price better. You can, if you're
Yep.
mutually could turn money to to your policyholders, et cetera. So there's a lot you can do there with that data in that competitive space too, and a little bit goes a long way for them as well. So I think it's kind of a straightforward move is around in having accessible data lake on the cloud that you can access and run analytics against, and start to do better predictive analytics around pricing and risks and everything else, and know your customers better, be able to create new products for them and get them more out more quickly. And then I think you can't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
I was gonna say, I will say that the last 2 years, the biggest challenge I've seen is that customers, specifically Guidewire customers going through their cloud migration strategy, has basically caused them to shut down all projects until they got through that, right? So there was a big kind of, the way I like to describe it, there was a pig in a python, right, that you couldn't get past while they finished that. And now that a lot of them have come out the other side of that, I'm seeing definitely accelerated interest now in taking advantage of the fact that they've done that migration, have access to the data, have access to these marketplaces.
Right.
So in that sense, because Guidewire is such a big player, at least in the PNC space, we're kind of on the other side of what has been a sort of a big blocker for the last 2 years in many cases on any new projects, involving data and AI.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those, even if done in a incremental way, it takes up a lot of time and resources to get those projects done. Sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
No, no, you have me thinking just that data acquisition, like mapping the data, that in itself it's a huge work effort. It's usually ongoing, especially as you have these various systems, as you bring on new systems for whatever reason. We've talked a lot about or we've defined maybe core system as the things that are most typically customer facing, right? So the policy issuance systems, the claim systems, billing systems. How do you think about what we've talked about in terms of maybe the internal core systems that aren't necessarily used to do outbound work, but are leveraged extremely um, heavily internally? Like I'm thinking about CRM systems that are brought in, or connectivity with carriers have with broker systems, or the exchange of data between those portals, and as you bring on maybe new distribution partners through acquisition. Are those all part of this? I mean, they definitely all have their own data challenges and data mapping challenges, but do you think about those in the same way you think about some of these other like policy core system um
Yeah, I was thinking about my sort of filing system that I referred to the core systems as the Guidewires of the world, things like that, right? But then the core, I kind of think of like CRMs as core plus, kind of they're
Okay.
still, to your point, CRM is universal, right? So any business has some level of customer resource management,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but it ties to your point. It ties back to the data that's within that, and claims data about an individual company, large, small, et cetera. So all the claims data, all the policy renewals, all the data over time, and particularly in the commercial space, which you guys playing, it's very complex with renewals and writers and endorsements over time. Personal lines, it's more straightforward, with annual or semi-annual renewals, et cetera. But commercial lines, similar in terms of the renewals, of course, but the complexities around the shifting capabilities, the shifting coverage that they might have over time. So keeping track of that and doing so in a transparent way for the customers, I think that's how all those pieces tie very closely together. And of course, as you point out, with distribution systems, the broker channel or agents, what tied and independent, replicating that data, making sure that those contacts are and those contact points are tracked in a way that makes sense too. That gets very complex over time to do that. And you need to think about those quote unquote core systems in the context of all those pieces, how they're going to talk to each other. When you bring in that new system, Guidewire Cloud, for example, Tom, how is it going to interact or integrate with our existing CRM system that is perhaps a newer system, or maybe it is a legacy system itself, right? So how are we going to make sure that data is replicated and synced up properly?
Yeah, I just think about like, the opportunity for AI and the analytics overlay now that you can leverage these tools for, and just some of the insights that people want to start collecting. Like I'll use just the distribution systems as an example. You want to know which agents or brokers are submitting the most business, but maybe you want to know which brokers are submitting the most business that you've bound that are also generating the highest claims, right? And so, but those insights, those systems have to talk to each other. You have to be able to get all the claims data and the policy data and the broker submission data all together. And so, when you start thinking about the complexity of those things, it feels like if you don't have a new, updated infrastructure, that those things are really challenging. But I do know that there's obviously carriers that haven't gone through these big transformative projects that are looking to leverage AI capabilities to do some of those types of things to get a leg up with their customer base, et cetera. So I'm just, leading to maybe that next question of how can carriers who still have legacy systems and have those data silos successfully implement some AI solutions, to get them over that first, I'll call it the first hurdle. There's probably hundreds of them.
Yes, but that's a big one and one of the most important ones, right? So, I mean, that key first step I think we talked about a little bit is getting that data into a cloud-based repository that you can access it, so that a flexible data layer. I mean, we talk about with our carrier customers, we talk about the kind of a modern digital business, being able to have data available in a flexible way. It can You can extract the data and have it in that cloud-based data layer sitting above and connected to those legacy systems while those legacy systems are still in place. Now, there still may be hurdles in terms of, particularly for the older system, mainframe-based one, in terms of batch processing and others. So there may be, there probably will be some uh, delays for some business processes, but that is a key first step, and that kind of data accessibility is a building block for all those other pieces too. And you start to build that, harkening back to an earlier question, to build that ROI around that. So we can, with some incremental progress, get the data into a place so we can run those analytics against it, whether that's quote unquote traditional AI ML or generative AI experimentation going on there too. And to that point, Gen AI is very good at pulling information from various sources as well, and kind of and pulling out key insights from that data too. So you can start to experiment with that, with Gen AI in that space, being able to pull all the data, submission data, as you point out, for commercial lines with maybe email-based submissions with a lot of information in them, and in PDF attachments. How do you start to extract information in an automated way from that, start to pull out the key insights from that, and present that to your underwriters and brokers as well, so that they don't have to kind of manually pull all that information out themselves.
Maybe wrapping it up, last question. Have you seen carriers benefit from using Gen AI to actually assist with the migration? Thinking about Gen AI more in terms of its use as a, software development copilot. Has it had some of those applications in the actual, modernization and migration efforts that you've seen?
Yeah, there's some cool new capabilities coming out, generative AI based ones and we're taking full advantage of them too, both our own capabilities as well as with our partners, adding it into AWS Transform to be able to refactor code in an automated way. Some of the older systems that really comes into play in the mainframe side, where for a while, the best that people were hoping to do was perhaps save money by lifting and shifting into the cloud or having COBOL in the cloud. But now with these new capabilities, there are ways to, in an automated way, refactor even some of the more complex and older languages that are out there. So very cool new capabilities coming out around that, and leveraging the tools to both accelerate as well as de-risk and lower the costs associated with the transfer of those older languages into a modern one. So giving carriers a lot of other tools to be able to do that. In some cases, to be able to, ironically, to extend the life of some of these systems too, right? To be able to lower the costs and be able to extract data from them without having to actually rip and replace some of those mainframe-based systems. So be able to kind of hollow out those capabilities so you still have the system of record on the mainframe, perhaps, or even some of the distributed systems that are out there, but be able to drive better underwriting decisions, be able to predict, do better predictive analytics around customers, identify fraud, all these other kind of surround pieces to that, while the kind of core calculations and the record itself still sit on those legacy systems. So adding a little bit more flexibility to the ability of carriers to figure out what they need to do based on their budget, the level of skills they have, their risk appetite, all those other things gives them, there are many more ways for them to approach that modernization journey.
Awesome. Well, Terry, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a very interesting discussion to have and informative for me. I learned a ton. So again, for everyone, this has been the latest episode of Unstructured Unlocked. We've had the pleasure of speaking with Terry Buechner, the Principal Insurance Specialist, Global Core Systems Lead at AWS. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Harry. Good to talk to you.